Some monsters get their names from the media or the police, but the really terrifying ones, they name themselves. Today, we're diving into the story of a killer who literally created his own terrifying brand, BTK.
Just imagine this letter showing up in 1974. It wasn't just some confession, it was a mission statement. The author laid out his whole twisted method and gave himself a name in 3 chilling letters: BTK. Bind, torture, kill. This wasn't just about the crime itself, this was about building a terrifying persona from the ground up. And, for the next 30 years, that's exactly what he did. He played this sick, twisted cat-and-mouse game with law enforcement. He'd send them taunting letters, creepy poems, even clues. He didn't just want to kill. He wanted the whole world to watch him do it. He basically turned an entire city's sense of safety into his own personal stage. But here's the twist that makes this whole story so deeply unsettling. When the mask finally came off, the face behind it wasn't some shadowy nightmare figure. It was a man people knew, a man they trusted. He was, in every sense of the word, the killer next door. So that persona, the good neighbor, that was his cover. But to really get what he was hiding, we've got to look at the pure terror he created. So let's start with the timeline of the terror itself. It all kicks off in 1974 with the absolutely brutal murder of 4 members of the Odero family. For the next 17 years, he would kill again and again, eventually confessing to 10 murders. And then, just silence. For over a decade, BTK was a ghost. But then, in 2004, he just couldn't stay away from the spotlight any longer. He started sending letters again, and that one fatal mistake would unravel his entire secret world just a year later. And this quote right here, it tells you everything you need to know about his motivation. This was never just about violence. It was about fame. He desperately craved notoriety. He saw himself as some kind of criminal mastermind, and he was furious when he felt he wasn't getting the credit he thought he deserved. So, who was this guy who so desperately wanted this twisted kind of fame? All right, let's peel back that first layer and meet the man himself, Dennis Rader. Okay, just look at this. It's almost impossible to believe, right? On one side, you've got the BTK Killer, a meticulous, sadistic monster who used the Nazi learned as a Boy Scout to tie up his victims. And then you look at the other side, Dennis Rader, a city compliance officer, a husband and a dad, a Boy Scout leader. He was even the president of his church congregation. He wasn't some loner hiding in a basement. He was right there, out in the open, a pillar of his community. And the shockwave of his arrest, you can't even imagine what it did to his family. His own daughter, Carrie, had no idea. The first she ever heard of it was when an FBI agent literally showed up at her front door to tell her that her dad, the man who raised her, was the boogeyman the entire city had been terrified of for decades. So how on earth does a person live 2 such completely different lives? How's that even possible? Well, to understand that, we have to go deeper. Let's get into the psychological framework of a predator. Forensic psychologists often talk about a concept called the dark triad to understand people like Rader. Think of it like a blueprint for a human predator. It's this nasty cocktail of 3 specific personality traits. And Rader, well, he's basically the poster child for it. So let's break it down. First up, psychopathy. This is that total lack of empathy, 0 remorse for what he did, all hidden behind a mask of charm that made people trust him. Second, you've got Machiavellianism. This guy was a master manipulator, a strategic planner who would stalk his victims for months, learning every single one of their routines. And third, the big one for him, was narcissism. This was the fuel in his engine, a massive sense of self-importance and this bottomless need for recognition. So how did he juggle all this in his daily life? Incredibly, Rader had his own little mental trick for it. He called it cubing. Yeah, cubing. He literally pictured his personality as a cube. One side was the family man, another was the church leader, and another, of course, was the BTK killer. He believed he could just mentally turn the cube to show whatever face the situation called for, which is how he kept it all separate in his own head. And for 30 years, this whole mental gymnastics thing actually worked. But here's the thing. He was an old-school monster in a fast-changing digital world. And that brings us to layer 3, the digital ghost that would finally bring him down. So the irony here is just perfect in a way. The very trait that drove him to kill in the first place, that massive ego, that narcissism, is exactly what got him caught. After all those years of silence, he just couldn't stand being forgotten. He had to reach out and taunt the police one last time, and that's when he made his big mistake.
So get this, in early 2005, he actually sends a message to the police and asks them, hey, if I send you a floppy disk, can you trace it? And the police, playing right along, tell him, nope, you'll be totally safe. And he bought it. A few days later, he sent the disk. What he had no clue about was something called metadata, the digital breadcrumbs we all leave behind. Well, forensic experts pulled a supposedly deleted file off that disk, and boom, there it was. The file's metadata showed it was last modified by a user named Dennis at the Christ Lutheran Church.
That was the ball game. That one little piece of data was all they needed. They knew Dennis Rader was the president of that church. So they got a warrant for a DNA sample from his daughter that was on file from a medical visit. It was a match. And just like that, after 30 long years, the cat and mouse game was over. But hold on, because this story doesn't end there in 2005. Not even close. We're now peeling back the final layer, and what we're finding is that the horrors of the past are still being uncovered. Right now, today. So, officially, Dennis Rader was convicted for killing 10 people. He's serving 10 consecutive life sentences. For a long time, everyone thought that was the end of it. But, investigators, they always had this nagging feeling there was more to the story.
And that brings us to the big question police are trying to answer today. Did BTK's reign of terror go beyond Wichita? Did it spread into neighboring states like Oklahoma and Missouri? Well, new evidence is starting to suggest, yeah, it might have.
Okay, so check this out. Cops in Osage County, Oklahoma, now say Rader is their prime suspect in the disappearance of a 16-year-old girl named Cynthia Kinney way back in 1976. Why? They found one of his journals with a really creepy entry, PJ Bad Wash Day. Now, PJ was his personal code for project, his sick term for potential victims. The journal also noted that laundromats were a good place to stalk targets. And where was Cynthia Kinney last seen? A laundromat. On top of that, they're now re-examining his connection to the 1990 murder of Shauna Beth Garber in Missouri. And it gets even more recent. Just in 2023, investigators went back and actually excavated the property where his old house stood. And they found things. They called them items of interest, including binding-type items that were deliberately buried. So the question is, were these souvenirs from his known murders, or are they clues to victims we don't even know about? The Dennis Rader story proves that the most dangerous monsters aren't always strangers lurking in the dark. Sometimes they're church presidents, scout leaders, neighbors. He managed to hide his dark side from everyone, including his own family, for 3 decades. And that leaves us with one final, really unsettling question. If he could do it, who else is hiding in plain sight right now?